On March 7th, 2014, in Dallas, Texas, a 24-year-old woman, Delisa Kelly, who was a mother of one, left her grandmother's home to attend the wake of her best friend, who was killed in a car accident. At that, Delisa was 2 months pregnant, and suddenly on her way to her friend's wake, she pocket-called her sister Jasmine Kelly. In the background, Jasmine heard her sister Delisa being subjected to violence by unknown man. She could hear her sister screaming for help, and the man who was physically assaulting her and was commanding her to stop screaming. Jasmine was terrified, and so she quickly informed her grandmother, who hurriedly dialed 911 and informed the police about what was going on. Unfortunately, the police didn't show any concerns for Delisa's safety, and they dismissed the fact that Delisa was missing. Unfortunately, a week later, on March 14th, 2014, Delisa's body was discovered in an abandoned home less than 2 miles from her grandmother's residence. She had been strangled to death, she suffered blunt force trauma, she had injuries including a crushed jaw and multiple wounds on her face and head. To make the matters worse, 10 years later, that is until today, the police has never arrested her killer, and the case had gone cold. This is the story of Delisa Kelly. Delisa Michelle Kelly was born on July 24th, 1989, in Dallas, Texas. Her mother was known as Lysandra Kelly, and she also had a sister named Jasmine Kelly. The siblings grew up in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, where they were happily raised. Years later, when Delisa was an adult, she entered a relationship with a man, and she got pregnant with her first child. The baby was a boy named Dunye, and he made Delisa to feel happy about being a mother. In the year 2014, Delisa again got pregnant with her second child, and she was extremely happy, and she was expecting to give birth in the early days of March 2014. Unfortunately, that same month, her best friend passed away in a car accident. Delisa was saddened to learn about the death of her best friend, and so on Friday, March 7th, 2014, she planned to attend her wake. At around 4 p.m. on March 7th, 2014, Delisa left her home to catch the bus so that she could attend her best friend's wake. At around 6:45 p.m. that day, Delisa pocket-called her sister, Jasmine. However, when Jasmine picked up her phone, she heard her sister, Delisa, screaming in terror in the background. She could hear Delisa telling a man to stop it and get off her. At the same time, Jasmine could also hear the voice of the man in the background telling Delisa to shut up. The man was threatening her sister with more violence, and she could hear him telling her sister, "You want to be hard-headed." A minute later, the phone was hanged up, and Jasmine tried to call her sister again, but despite multiple attempts, Delisa did not answer her phone again. At around 7 p.m., Jasmine received a text from Delisa's phone, which said, "Call you in a minute." Jasmine replied the text asking if Delisa was okay, and if someone was hurting her. She received a reply saying, "He thinks I was with someone else." When Jasmine tried calling again, Delisa never returned her calls. After Jasmine failed to reach her sister, she knew that she was in danger, so she called her grandmother and let her know about what was going on, and she asked for help. The grandmother called Lysandra, who was Delisa and Jasmine's mother, and asked her what was going on. Lysandra was so alarmed because she hadn't heard from her daughter, Delisa. It was clear that Delisa was in great danger, so little after 8:30 p.m., the grandmother called 911 and reported her granddaughter, Delisa, missing. Unfortunately, instead of the police recognizing the severity of the situation and taking action, the police did not consider Delisa's disappearance to be a priority. After the dispatcher got off the phone with Delisa's grandmother, she called a police sergeant to ask whether or not a missing persons report should be filed. The dispatcher spoke to Sergeant Mansell of the Dallas Police Department and gave him the details concerning Delisa's disappearance, as had been provided by her grandmother. Unfortunately, Sergeant Mansell casually dismissed the possibility that Delisa was missing. He didn't even show any concern for her safety. However, he offered to attempt to trace Delisa's phone. As hours went by, the family's desperation to find Delisa Kelly grew. Later, 911 dispatcher called Delisa's grandmother and asked for Delisa's number and her cell phone carrier so that they could attempt to trace her location. Once the dispatcher got the number, she called Sergeant Mansell back and gave it to him. Sergeant Mansell then called the cell phone provider and requested a location for the phone. However, the cell phone provider called Sergeant Mansell back and told him that the A location for the phone could not be found. After getting the reply, Sergeant Mansell then faxes a form to the courier to request that they continue to attempt to locate the phone. The following day, which was on March 8th, Delisa's family still hadn't received any update concerning Delisa's disappearance, so Jasmine reached out to the police again. This time, an officer came to meet her in person, and she was able to file a want to locate report for Delisa. A want to locate report is a document that you file with police to help them find a missing person. On the night of March 8th, Delisa's boyfriend called a detective in the missing persons unit and left them information to call him back. On March 9th, Delisa's case was finally given to a missing persons detective, and later that afternoon, Delisa's family went to the police station to express their concerns about her disappearance. They spoke with the detective and explained that Delisa's disappearance was out of character and that her phone had been off for 2 days. The police then sent out an endangered person bulletin to patrol cars, and they also contacted the phone carrier again to get a copy of her call logs so that they could determine who she last spoke to. The police then turned their attention to her boyfriend for an interview. After speaking with him, the police concluded that he had no useful information to offer and did not know where Delisa was. The police called around to local hospitals and morgues to see if maybe Delisa had been admitted or had an accident. Unfortunately, she wasn't found in any of the hospitals or morgues. On March 10th, 2014, the police visited Delisa's neighborhood to investigate her disappearance. They conducted interviews with Delisa's grandmother and canvassed the area around her home. Unfortunately, their searches bore no fruits. They reached out to the local transport system to determine whether Delisa had ever boarded the bus that she was supposed to take to her friend's funeral. They confirmed that Delisa never made it to her friend's funeral. The investigators continued pursuing leads and searching for any clues that could shed light on Delisa's whereabouts, but they were finding nothing. That same day, the police released a press release on social media asking for any information about Delisa's whereabouts. The following day, which was on March 11th, 2014, Delisa's family held a press conference with the hope that their attention would help them find Delisa or a lead to her whereabouts. After the press conference, they started receiving several tips that people had seen Delisa days after she was last seen by her family. Investigators went to the area where people said they last saw Delisa, and they searched for her there, but unfortunately, there was no sign of her. They also received several tips which suggested that Delisa had been seen at a local stop and save convenience store between the hours of 5 o'clock and 6:30 p.m. on the day she went missing. After getting this tip, the investigators went to the store to see if they could find any information. While there, they attempted to obtain a security footage from the local store in order to locate Delisa on the camera, but unfortunately, their efforts didn't yield any result. On March 14th, 2014, at around 10 a.m., patrol officers discovered a body on the porch of an abandoned home located on the 1200 block of Presidio Avenue. They called the detectives who arrived at the scene and identified the body to be that of Delisa Kelly. Delisa had been beaten and strangled to death. She had bruises and cuts all over her body. Her jaw and her hand had been crushed, and she had gashes in her face and her head. The investigators immediately classified the case as an homicide, and they began searching for the leads to identify her killer. 2 weeks later, Dallas Police Department launched an internal investigation, and concerns were raised about how Sergeant Mansell had handled the initial 911 call and his actions on the night that Dallas disappeared. Dallas Police Department held Sergeant Mansell responsible and suspended him for 1 day. He was then allowed to continue with his role as a police officer. Unfortunately, leads and tips concerning the case began to dry out quickly, and the family blamed the police for their lack of action when they first called 911. They were also frustrated by the lack of progress in the case, and they felt like the police were not doing enough to find Delisa's killer. Months later, There was still no information about the case. But fortunately, NBC5 were able to obtain a surveillance footage from the Stop and Save store on the day that Delisa went missing. When they analyzed the footage, they saw Delisa entering the store at around 6 p.m. on March 7th, 2014. A few minutes later, they see her in the footage leaving the store and getting into the passenger side of a blue Mercury Grand Marquis, and 30 minutes later, her sister received a pocket dial. Later on, the police said that after seeing surveillance footage, they tracked down the owner of the Grand Margus car and spoke to him. Unfortunately, the police never shared with the public what they talked about, and the identity of the man was also not revealed. In the months following Delisa's murder, her family worked tirelessly to bring attention to her unsolved murder, and they also sought accountability for what they saw as failure by the police department. They advocated for police changes like creating Kelly Law in 2015, which required police officers to respond to incidents reported through 911. As of today, no one has been held responsible for Delisa Kelly's murder, and her family is left to grapple with the ongoing injustice. Unfortunately, the case has gone cold. If you have any information about Delisa Kelly's murder, please contact the Dallas Police Department, and may her soul rest in peace.